Okay, there we go.
The rest of the meeting will be easy for us.
You gotta hit the button. Come on.
Good morning. I'll call to order the May 23rd Collaborative General Government Meeting. We don't have a quorum, so this will end up to be a discussion. But we'll move ahead on the, we'll skip number 1, which is approval of previous meetings then. We'll start with minute reports. I guess we'll start at your end.
Good morning, Mark Ells from Barnstable. Just want to let everyone know that we're entering into our review of our Phase 1, Phase 2 Comprehensive Water Management Plan on, I believe it's Monday, June 4th. We're going to start that joint review and the MEPA DRI review process. So any of you who are interested, I can certainly share information. It's on our website if you want to access it. If you want to come to the hearing, it's over at our highway building in one of the conference rooms of 7 p.m. So you're all welcome.
Yeah, it's on your town website?
It is. It's on the town website, yes.
Okay.
It'd be under our Citizens Advisory Committee, under our draft comprehensive water management plan.
That's interesting. I don't know, Andrew, if that's worthwhile to put on our
We can.
website as well,
Like it.
because everyone's interested in how the process goes.
Great.
And we've had that discussion in our town, the next steps, so that'd be good. I guess we're just status quo right now. We're still moving ahead. Sims?
Sims McGrath from the town of Orleans. The Weston and Sampson centralized, decentralized, large pipe, small pipe study continues. The 4th informational presentation will be coming at our next meeting, which is the first Wednesday in June. I think it's 6th, maybe. Anyway.
Yeah, this is 6.
And town meetings supported all articles relative to wastewater. We reappropriated monies to continue water quality monitoring and to do a study to come up with an answer on how to manage Cedar Pond, a saltwater, freshwater environment. And this has impacts on the TMDLs for Rock Harbor.
Good, thank you.
Pat Pageron, Town of Truro. We're still moving forward with our needs assessment with our consultant, Weston and Sampson. We met last night. We talked about some stormwater issues, which we're addressing now. There's some areas in Truro, particularly along Route 6 and some of our areas down in Pond Village. We had talked about some regulations, addressing that. It's kind of a weak area in Truro. Our mapping and our wastewater, we're doing lot by lot analysis. We have about 460 lots that we'll be plotting where location of septic systems are. In June, we should have a revised nitrogen analysis and nitrogen loading modeling. So we'll be meeting a couple of times in June, and we hope to have a workshop with our stakeholders.
Good, thank you.
Inviting them. Yep.
Thank you. It's your update.
David McChesney, Provincetown.
David, you gotta push the button so the light comes on.
There you go.
Oh, we have the same thing, I should know that. April 23rd, Cape Cod Commission Regulatory Committee approved the increase of capacity of our treatment plant, so that's well underway. Good news was Cape Cod National Seashore, the Herring Cove Bathhouse, they're hooking up to our sewer. This will allow them to eliminate their septic system, and they will be building, starting in the fall, their new $5.2 million bathhouse, refreshment, et cetera, et cetera. It's quite impressive. They presented it again last night. We also have now got the Coastal Acres Campground will be hooking up to the sewer. This is a critical environmental issue next to the Champaigner Pond. And I guess I finally have found a negative on our system. And I would caution the towns in the future, the biggest negative in Provincetown on our sewer system is actually the roads. With the trenching of the roads is obviously an invitation for potholes. So we have tremendous negative reaction on the trenching. And it's interesting, the Massachusetts Department of Transportation requires, if you trench a road, that the paving is curb to curb. So we have some curb to curb on 6A adjacent to areas in Provincetown, which is patch paving. So our future expansions are going to be looking at requiring curb to curb paving. We should be having meetings on that soon. That's it.
Thank you, Dave. I was smiling during that and pointing at Bob Duckinson because the roads has been a huge issue in Chatham, rough roads. And Florence isn't here, but that seems to be her number one topic when she wants to talk about the project.
Well, part of our big problem will be corrected this fall when they start redoing Commercial Street, so that'll be a big headache off our platter.
Is there anyone in the audience who would like to comment or add to the discussion? We're kind of in a funny arrangement with you out there and us up here, but I don't want to close this off. Let me just comment that we have steering committee meeting, was it 2 weeks ago?
Yes.
Now? And Mike Gege made a presentation and an update, if you will, on some of the costing factors that they're using in the model that you've all heard Andrew and Paul talk about. It wasn't a lot of new information. It was based on their more lengthy study a couple years ago, but it's refined a bit as they put it into the overall model. The reason I'm bringing it up here is that the slides from that presentation have been, I think, emailed out to all the governing board, and I assume we're putting it on the website as well.
Yes.
And Cara, I think you guys will put how's that work with the DVDs? Does that go to the various towns then to distribute, or?
I'm going to create a link from our website to the Town of Barnstable website, and that way that you can just click on the link and it brings you straight to the video.
Use the mic.
Please.
Right.
Right. I'm helping Andrew out.
A link will be created from our website directly to the Town of Barnstable website, because as of right now, it automatically is being uploaded to the Town of Barnstable website. So it'll just be very easy for anyone to access. And then I'm also working with Chris from our IT department to look at reformatting the page as well for the agenda postings, the minutes, and the videos, to have it all together so it's easily accessible.
Okay, that's great. And I assume the towns can get a copy of the DVD if they request that?
I'm
Yeah,
not
that
sure yet how that
That
might
works?
work. I think that would be something if you want to discuss it with me and give them that option.
Okay.
I received one DVD from Channel 18. I don't know if you want our IT department to make copies for distribution or not.
I'm not sure that, what I'd like to do is have it, I guess for me, if people request it, I'd like to be able to give it out. I'm not sure we want to force it on everyone. Is there any other opinions on that? But because some towns may be interested and some towns may not. The slides may be enough, or they may have something else going on. But
Okay.
otherwise, we could end up burying ourselves in work if we automatically do this every week. Okay. Good morning, Linnell.
Good morning, I apologize.
We may accept it. You want, I won't give you a chance to relax.
Okay.
Move you right into update from
Sandwich?
Sandwich. Yeah, thank you.
Well, the major update is that Paul Niswicki did the presentation he's been going around doing. Did it with came to the sandwich community on Saturday. I'm out of breath, I'm sorry. I ran up the street. So even though, I'm sure we would like to have had more participation from the community, one thing that Paul is focused on, and I think it's exactly right, is what that dialogue with the various communities is. And so we had a very lively discussion now. Obviously have the benefit of having heard a lot of this information before, but I have to comment on the fact, and we all are aware of this, that things are evolving so quickly on all levels in terms of information, looking at the governance of any potential piece of this. And what I really love and respect about what the Cape Cod Commission and this body, through Andrew, is trying to do as well, is move that information, understanding, language forward. And that was very present. The people that were involved learned things they didn't know, gained perspectives they didn't have, had fears assuaged. So it was very valuable. And obviously, Sandwich is now, 14 months into our comprehensive water resource management plan. And it gave me an opportunity also to kind of give some more information to our community through that conversation about where we are and the impact of regional planning on our plan. I will say Paul was complimentary to Sandwich, which I've passed on to my board and town manager, both of our town manager and his interest and expertise, and also his kind of longevity, which was nice for people to hear in Sandwich. Also that Sandwich has been having a good conversation about water. So Paul was very validating and affirming of where Sandwich is in the process, how we're approaching it. And frankly, that's about it. The Water Quality Advisory Committee still acts as the steering committee for the Comprehensive Water Resource Management Plan. We're making sure everyone's reading the assessment that needs to read it, and of course offering it to the community as a whole. It's available on our website, and that's what we're moving forward with.
You remind me that we all have a common problem or issue, and that is how to get people to pay attention to us before the dollar figures come out. Mm-hmm. And you end up having the same small group come to every meeting. We did try something different this year in Harwich. We started our town meeting with a 10 to, 15-minute presentation by the chair of a water quality task group, and went through the stats of where we are now, figuring that we have we have some issues that drew a crowd, the new regional school system that we're talking about. So we used that opportunity while we had them stuck in their seats to give them an update on water quality. So we'll see how that, if we get feedback, if that gives positive, people understand it better.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Chairman, I would agree that while that is a challenge, what I think is happening, though, is all these different events are helping build that understanding language. For one great emphasis that Paul made in our presentation was that there is no foregone conclusion about what the recommendation will be in December. That is powerful, because the media, of course, and other groups, we've talked about this a lot, have jumped on the idea of regional planning to create a lot of fear-based and non-information. So I think that's an important reinforcement. So while we may not have people, we are getting our message solid and evolving in that, and it is a work in progress. That's the idea of what the collaborative's committed to, and I think the Cape Cod Commission as well, in their task between now and the end of December, between the time that they come up with that recommendation, is the dialogue and the evolution. The other thing that Paul emphasized with our particular group, who brought up alternative treatment plans, was that they are on the table. That alternative treatment is definitely being looked at, and he referenced the new tool, and he referenced how specific we can become now with the new tool, parcel by parcel, area by area, looking at what alternatives plans may mean in terms of cost development. So the message is evolving, it's important, and the amount of people that are there are one thing, but what's really important is the evolution of the work and the message, and I think that's happening.
Yeah. Good. Thank you. Any other comments before we move to Mark?
Very quickly, thank you. Andy and Paul Nedzwicki did the same presentation. I believe it was the first meeting in May before the town council. Well received. Actually, it was well attended by students as well. And I would just repeat what was just said, but I wanted to tell you all and Andy that almost every parent called me and thanked me, because after the presentation, the students were writing papers. I believe they're from the Lighthouse Charter School. And he spent over an hour with them explaining the issues, and they must have known me. They called me rather than you, Andy, but from them, thank you for taking that time. They greatly appreciated it.
That's great.
Okay, that's good. Andrew, we'll put you on next
Okay.
then.
I'll just on Jane's behalf, she's on vacation. I'm sure everybody knows, or most likely most of you know, that the Eastham Water Supply Development Project failed at town meeting. So I don't know what their next step is on that, but that's another, they changed what they were doing on the financing, changed the project, skinnied it down somewhat, changed it from betterment to largely tax funded, and still had a pretty rough town meeting with that. So again, a lot of people saying some people saying they doubted the need, but my sense of it was that it was not a uprising that was rooted and we don't need this, but again, fear of the cost and how that's going to be distributed among people. So I think it's another cautionary tale for us all as we move forward with this about how voters are perceiving the cost management aspects of this issue. We've been on the wetlands mitigation projects. Just for a reminder, we've got the county-sponsored process through MEPA to submit environmental notification forms for 2 inlet widening projects and the dredging of the mill pond in Barnstable as a nitrogen management strategy. We proposed putting together ENFs that a little different than the type that are normally seen in that they don't provide detailed engineering design plans of a particular alternative, but talk more broadly about inlet widening and dredging as mitigation strategies for nitrogen management in an attempt to get the Secretary's office to provide certificates that lay out what the permitting requirements and environmental review requirements would be, and ideally indicate that with certain information provided, projects of this sort do not require environmental impact reports, which would save towns significant time and money in the review process. We've been having a lot of discussions with the MEPA office because these are not sort of standard ENFs. Procedurally, they've had a little bit of a difficult time figuring out how to process them. So on behalf of the towns that signed off on the ENFs, we requested an extension that runs sometime into, I think, towards the end of next week. To allow us time to work process out with MEPA. Not even substance, it's really a process discussion at this point. We may end up needing to extend again to enable those discussions to conclude, but I think we're headed in the right direction, and substantively headed in the right direction in terms of limiting the subsequent environmental review that would be required. But my sense is we're probably going to have to give them another extension so that we can handle the process issues.
I may not understand it completely, Andrew.
I'm not sure I do either,
The
but go
deadline
ahead.
that we're going through now that's the beginning phase, and
Typically when you file.
when that's done, then there'll be other discussions afterwards.
Right, well, typically when you file an ENF, there's a set period, I think it's 3 weeks, for everybody who's got an interest to get comments in and for MEPA to act on it. That comment process, raised some questions, so we extended the time for MEPA to do their initial review. So
So once the review's done, and then there'll be the next steps. where
there'll be
you
some
react
next,
to
right,
that.
right. And the idea behind it and the proposal that we made in MEPA's guidance was to recommend a special review committee that would be pulled together, that would provide an opportunity for all the interested parties and the agencies that would typically comment on these things to provide their input so that we can handle and hash out the issues within the MEPA context prior to them issuing a certificate, so we could avoid the requirement to do an EIR. And we still want to have that discussion in some form, although the form for that discussion is changing as we go. So,
Any other questions, comments? This has been I think this is an important project for us all, because we're all looking at ways to help us save money and do nitrogen mitigation. We have, I know, at least one in Harwich that's critical. Well, we have 2 actually. One is more straightforward than the other, but appreciate you working on this and keeping it going.
yeah, I mean, at this point, it's really just a procedural inside baseball kind of discussion. When we get to the substance, we can have a little bit broader discussion about it, because frankly, that's more interesting. The process stuff's kind of a popsicle headache, but we need to work it out. As been mentioned, Paul and I have been doing separate but equal selectmen's tours. He's been going around talking a lot about the wastewater management plan and the tool. I've been talking to boards more about the process that we all agreed on for input into the regional evaluation. So this week I was in Falmouth, and then last night in Chatham. As Mark mentioned, Paul and I did Barnstable together. There may be one or two others that we're doing together, but generally speaking, we're making 2 appearances, which I think actually helps, because it just brings, the more we bring the issue of wastewater to the boards of selectmen with greater frequency, we get an opportunity to get into more in-depth discussion. So we'll be wrapping that up for the most part by late June, early July.
And Cara, you're the one that's setting the schedule on this, I understand. Making
Yes, I am.
contacts and stuff.
Yes.
Okay.
And then our budget was approved by the Assembly, so the budget that this board approved and submitted to the commissioners, which they then passed on to the Assembly, passed unchanged. So everything we articulated that we needed, we're going to have for the coming year, so that's good. And then lastly, as a follow-up to the steering committee meeting, where Larry talked about the issue of cost factors was the sort of the subject matter of that discussion. We scheduled a follow-up meeting for public input and public discussion. It's going to be in Harwich Town Hall a week from this Thursday. Is that the 31st, I think?
Yes, 31st.
From 6 to 8.
And that'll be in the Selectmen's Conference Room.
Right. So what we'll be doing is largely what was done at the steering committee. Mike and I will make some presentation on the material and the analysis that he's done, and then we'll open it up for discussion. And again, we're going to be pretty flexible depending on who comes and what they want to do. If they want to hear the presentation and then say what they came to say, they can do that. If they want to engage in a discussion about, get into a conversation about questions about what they heard, we'll have a discussion. We'll play it either way based on the sense of the crowd.
Okay. And how are you going to advertise this?
We're going to post it up on the website. We'll send a broadcast email around to sort of our list of people that have expressed an interest in the issue. We'll put out a press release and try and get it in all the Friday papers.
Okay, great.
So that'll probably go out today.
Okay. Just for clarification, Cara, the room is called the Griffin Room.
Okay.
And then we're going to take what we're going to talk about today, which is the regulatory and statutory environment, after
Okay.
today's discussion, probably a couple weeks' notice, do another one of these meetings. So probably try and do 2 for that. It really only worked to do 1 for this one.
Okay, good.
So that's where we are.
I guess one of our popular topics, litigation update.
Yeah. The court parties filed with the court on Monday, as they were required to do, and requested an extension until Tuesday next. The reason given was that the CLS lead attorney had a baby on the 13th and hasn't been able to devote the time necessary to concluding their discussions or hammering out their schedule. Our expectation is, based on the parties' previous report to the court that they had failed to settle, is that the filing on Tuesday will be a proposed schedule for bringing the case to trial. I suppose there's always the possibility, because their filing also indicated that they're still talking, that they could come up with an 11th hour settlement. But our expectation is they're going to file a court schedule. And so we should know that.
And that's
Tuesday.
public at that point. I mean,
That is public at that point. So as soon as I get that filing, I'll forward it around to people.
Will the filing give any details on what they discussed up to then, or will it
Nope.
be just simply the schedule? that
Nope,
they
it'll just
talked
be a
about?
schedule. It'll be like the settlement discussions never took place.
Okay.
I will point out, and it's in part of the next subject, but I'll just bring it up now. I included in your packet a letter. There was a letter from 4 members of Congress to EPA back in the winter, where members of Congress, including the chair, the House chair of Transportation and Infrastructure, and Senator Inhofe, who I'm not sure what committee he's actually probably not chairing anything at the moment, but he's ranking ranking minority member on environmental infrastructure issues, questioned EPA about the settlement discussions. And you might say it's kind of interesting why a bunch of members of Congress from the center of the country took an interest in settlement discussions on Cape Cod. And my sense of it isn't that they had any particular interest in Cape Cod, but they had an interest in, as we predicted, the effect of this suit on EPA's interpretation of what requires an NPDES surface water discharge. In particular, these guys represent areas that agricultural interests are strong, and the treatment of non-point sources as not regulated under the Clean Water Act is of enormous concern to them, because whereas septic is the driver for us, much of what's driving water quality in the central part of the country is nutrient runoff from agriculture. And that is currently not regulated specifically under the Act, and they have a strong interest, and the large agricultural interests have a strong interest in ensuring that that stays this way.
I may have commented on this before, but a few years ago, the EPA sent out draft regulations that it banned cows from streams in Wisconsin, and which would have done in the dairy industry, because I don't know if you've ever been to Wisconsin. It's probably like Vermont. Every farm has streams through it, and so if you say you can't have cows in there, all of a sudden it would. And it got such a big outcry that they quickly pulled that draft regulation out of play. But that sets the stage for some of the discussion.
Right. So what this letter and this exchange confirmed is what we have thought all along, which is, this lawsuit plays out very much on a national scale, has implications perceived well beyond how it applies to us. So I bring the EPA letter to your attention because the response EPA made to Congress has significant implications to the region. And in particular, draw your attention to their answer to question number 1, which I'll read. Some of these questions, quite frankly, all due respect to Congress, are kind of silly. A little bit of straw man questions, and then EPA did a pretty good job sort of knocking them down.
Well, that's strange.
Yeah, I know. But there's a lot to the answers that is instructive. So the first question was asked of EPA: does EPA consider groundwater aquifer to be a water of the United States under the Clean Water Act? Please explain. The response is no. Okay, clear enough. EPA does not consider groundwater aquifer to be a water of the United States under the Clean Water Act. Groundwater is not regulated by the Clean Water Act. Fine. EPA has a long-standing and consistent interpretation that the Clean Water Act, and this is the important part, may cover discharges of pollutants from point sources to surface waters that occur via groundwater that has a direct hydrologic connection to the surface water. And if that doesn't sound familiar to anybody who lives here, then you haven't been paying attention. Courts have cited EPA's most recent preamble discussing this interpretation in affirming Clean Water Act authority over discharges to groundwater that has a direct hydrologic connection to surface water. And then they footnote 3 court cases that articulate court's findings supporting EPA's determination that they have jurisdiction over a groundwater discharge that affects the surface water. Whether or not such a hydrologic connection exists and the need for an NPDES permit for any given source is highly dependent on the facts and circumstances surrounding each permit decision. A number of factors are relevant in evaluating the connection between groundwater and surface water, such as geology, flow, and slope. A fact-specific evaluation could support a determination that an NPDES permit is required or a determination that one is not required. So in other words, we have discretionary authority over permitting groundwater discharges where there's a direct link between those discharges and surface water quality. So to those that have been sitting there for the last 18 months saying there's no merit to this suit and there's no merit to this issue, EPA Assistant Administrator writes a letter that basically concedes jurisdiction and puts the question around a series of fact-based issues without any definition of whether or not, of what the criteria would be to determine whether the facts in a particular case would authorize them or compel them to assert jurisdiction. So to my mind, this letter, and there's a lot else in here, but that one paragraph indicates to me that it's a value judgment or a scientific judgment the EPA can make, not a jurisdictional judgment, or not that they don't believe they have the authority, nor to question whether the courts find that they have the authority, but really a matter of their discretion whether they choose to assert jurisdiction on any groundwater discharge that affects the surface water, and whether or not they end up seeing the 4 POTWs owned by Barnstable, Falmouth, Chatham, and Provincetown as falling into that category, whether they would extend that to any of the smaller discharges that are privately owned, or whether they take that down to septics. It's simply a matter of whether they think that the science supports that determination and whether they want to extend themselves to utilize that interpretation. So in light of that response, it's not a great surprise to me that the parties didn't settle, since that's the core of the case.
But it does set them up, it appears, to be able to treat us differently than they treat the Midwest, because you can be fact-based. And so in that sense, it's kind of, it helps their, I would think that goes a long way in setting the stage to get out of that argument.
I think that it provides them the cover they need to say, to Big Ag one thing and to Cape
Right.
Cod something different.
Yeah.
Whether that's a comfort to them and a threat to us is a matter of interpretation. But clearly, there's certainly voluminous information on Cape Cod that's fairly unquestioned, and frankly that served our needs. Whether it was discussion around the MMR just cleanup and the connection between those groundwater discharges, those groundwater pollutants, and the effect on freshwater ponds, whether it was Schumann or Johns or other sources of drinking water. There's a lot of information out there that draws a direct correlation between surface water and groundwater on Cape Cod. What EPA and the court parties would do with this, or what a court would do with this in terms of compelling assertion of that jurisdiction, I have no idea. But I think this letter is very telling in terms of creating a real. We now have the plaintiffs and the defendants both saying you can permit NPDES discharges to the ground. That strikes me as a problem.
We have a letter. I'm not sure how widely distributed this is. Can we put this on our website so that anyone can get
Yes,
it?
it's actually already posted on the front
You do
page.
good work.
And I brought some extra copies if anybody would like, from the audience would like some
Okay.
copies.
Maybe.
Yeah. So there's a fair amount of case law about whether a discretionary authority can be compelled. That an agency can be forced to use its discretion to act. But I think that's ultimately going to be the discussion and probably the place where the court case is going to hinge, not whether or not, since you've got a plaintiff that's asserting the defendant has jurisdiction, and you've got a letter to Congress by the defendant saying we have jurisdiction, that doesn't really seem to be the heart of the matter anymore. So for all those that have been out there saying, this lawsuit and this threat of federal permitting as a fantasy or a creation, a self-serving creation, I would suggest they spend a few minutes looking at this letter and then think about their position. So that's what I have on litigation at this
Tim?
point.
Thank you. If I could impose on the executive director's voluminous experience, what sort of time frame do litigations like this typically follow?
Years. I mean, we're already 20 months into this discussion, and no argument has even been scheduled yet. My sense is, in issuing the order to allow the mediation to take place, the court expressed a certain degree of impatience with the schedule, and I think the court has entertained more extension discussion than we had thought that they might. My sense is once the court is formally notified that the parties can't settle and will go to trial, that he will be, as is Judge Wolf, he will be fairly aggressive in holding people to that schedule. So I would think some point this year, briefs are going to get filed and the case will start to get litigated. Beyond that, I don't know.
Will we have a sense of that next Tuesday on their, when they?
We'll have a
set
sense
the
of what
schedule?
we'll have a sense of what the parties have proposed. The court obviously has its discretion to come back and say, your schedule's fine, or your schedule's no good, and here's my schedule. And the court, in this instance, gets the final word. I will remind people that the judge who has this case is Judge Wolf, who was the presiding judge in CLF's successful challenge to EPA's approval of the TMDL for Lake Champlain by the state of Vermont, and that resulted in the first ever rescission of a TMDL approval by EPA, and the EPA taking responsibility for the TMDL away from the state and doing it themselves. So, and that was this judge, and that was his ruling in that case. And he is generally somewhat impatient and not very, I'm trying to write the right word. He's had issues with the Department of Justice in the past, and has been very difficult or made life difficult for the government in defending various litigations that have come before him.
Mechanically, does this change who's the, from EPA to the Department of Justice, or how's that? Work?
Department of Justice represents EPA in this matter. So they, at the end of the day, Justice makes the calls on legal strategy. And Justice was a participant in the mediation process. There was always somebody from Justice there.
Okay. Any other questions for Andrew on this, on litigation? Dave, Jerry, if you will, so we can capture your on TV here.
Jerry Patamas, Town of Falmouth. How does this, now they're going to court, would the collaborative, or because the towns have been asked to consider joining in or being a party to the court case, such that you tag along, you could spend as much money as you want, but at least you have a seat at the table. I know the county withdrew before. Now that we're going to court, is there any consideration of trying to get a seat at the table or being an intervener?
Well, there's a strategic decision that we'll have to make once we see what the party's final report is to the court about whether or not the county or any individual or consortium of towns would choose to intervene and get a seat at the table. And we have not had that conversation yet. I know there has been some discussion. I don't know how broad it's been, because the county has not been approached, but there are a couple of lawyers out there that are suggesting to towns that they intervene in the case. I don't know where those discussions are. As I said, we haven't been a party to it, so I don't know what the intentions of any particular town or water or wastewater district might be. My understanding is it started with a water supply district that who has an attorney that has suggested that they intervene, and has been trying to find other communities to join in that intervention. But again, we have not been approached. Myself, my belief, neither Paul nor I, nor our attorneys have been approached by the attorneys that are seeking to create intervener status by the towns.
And so in that case, we're just paying attention and.
We're watching it, and I think, at some point, once we know what the proposed schedule is going to be and how this case is going to proceed, we should have a discussion again. And again, I would suggest it's probably going to end up being with the county commissioners, because as a litigation strategy, we've been advised that this board does not have the authority to go into executive session. So as a matter of litigation strategy, it would be not the wisest discussion to have in this forum. So it may be that we need to have that conversation with the county commissioners. So if they choose to, they could go in to executive session to discuss the strategic possibilities around which it makes sense to intervene or not intervene. But there's really been no point in having that conversation until we saw what the outcome of the court discussion was going to be.
Yeah. Okay.
There's also the possibility, those notices are still active. They could join us at any time. So it's not a unilateral decision about whether we choose to get involved on our own or not. The parties could choose to bring us into it if they wanted to.
Okay. We'll move on then to review of existing legal authorities on wastewater management.
Yeah. This is the second of sort of the issue areas that we wanted to talk about surrounding in the context of the regional discussion. I thought it would be useful to spend a little bit of time just getting everybody up to the same page on what the regulatory and statutory environment is in which we're all operating. And so we broke this down into federal, state, and commission authorities. The letter that I sent around was in that context. I know we've already talked about it, but it clearly changes the game in terms of our assessment and understanding of what EPA's role is. So EPA has two primary roles as it relates to us. In Massachusetts, EPA issues surface water discharge permits. In most other states, the Federal Clean Water Act permitting requirements are delegated to the states, and the states write the surface water discharge permits subject to EPA's review, but they write them for EPA. Massachusetts never accepted delegation from EPA for NPDES discharging, so it's one of the, I mean, last time I looked, and Jerry, you might know, I think it was 4 states in the country didn't have delegation. 3 of them were in New England. So Region 1's always kind of been had a problem with their permitting from that perspective. So Massachusetts is unlike 46 other states where even if there's permit jurisdiction, the permit comes out of the state. In this case, if there is jurisdiction, you get a state permit and a federal permit. And no great surprise, the two don't always match up. There's an attempt to try and make them match up, but they don't always match up. So EPA, under this letter, would have jurisdiction if they chose to assert it to require surface water NPDES permits for some or all groundwater discharges on the Cape. That would be a significant departure from the reality that everyone's living under here. It wouldn't be that different from the reality that most other communities that have wastewater infrastructure are living under off the Cape in Massachusetts, but it would be different. And I think that if you talk to most of the permittees, most of them that have surface water discharge permits end up appealing them. A higher percentage of federal permits, I believe, get appealed than state permits do. So that's just a reality of life.
Is there a common thread through that of why the appeals are so high?
Yeah, that they generally felt that the standards that the feds impose are more onerous than the state and that they're very expensive with which to comply. And there's a general sense that, and this is true, I'm not talking out of school on this, certainly true on the drinking water side, was one of the reasons why the communities and the water suppliers banded together 20 years ago or so to keep the state being the primacy agent, which is the Safe Drinking Water Act equivalent of delegation agency on the wastewater side, keep the state being the primacy agent so that drinking water is regulated directly by the state. The sense is that it's harder to talk to the feds and get them to understand local conditions than it is to talk to the state. That's the general theme from the regulated world about dealing with the state versus the feds. The state regulatory agency should be happy because the feds make them look good generally in terms of their relationship with the regulated community. So, by and large, I think the perception is that it's very hard to get the federal government to assess and understand local conditions and to adjust their permits in a way that still allows them to meet water quality standards, which is a legal mandate, but do it in a way that's somewhat less onerous or more forgiving to the community. Right now, there is no federal permitting on the Cape, but again, according to the discussion we just had, that's a possibility. The other primary role of EPA on the wastewater side is that they have the authority and responsibility to approve the TMDLs that are done by the state. So the technical reports that UMass Dartmouth does under the MEP establish the water quality goals or apply the goals, the national goals, to a specific water body. And then that information goes to DEP. DEP then does some additional analysis, and proposes a total maximum daily load. So it takes that technical report, turns it into a regulatory number, and then that regulatory number goes out for public hearing, and that TMDL gets approved, subject to the approval by EPA. And EPA's choices are to approve, disapprove, or overwrite. So they can say, it isn't good enough, go back and do it again. They can say it's fine, or they can take the authority and do it themselves. They don't want to do that. They don't do that much. They don't have the resources to do that. And they know full well that the states would be perfectly happy to say, you do it. You know, in Massachusetts, because we tend to break our waters down, we have small systems, not just the estuary systems on the Cape, but relatively small river systems. Massachusetts, for a variety of reasons that were driven largely by state needs, breaks its waters down into small segments. Once you break a river, you can take a whole river and say it needs a TMDL. You can break it into segments, and then each segment needs a TMDL. Having broken it into segments, Massachusetts has somewhere in the order of 1,600 water bodies that require separate TMDLs for the whole range of contaminants. So you can do a nutrient one, you can do a bacteria one, you can do any number of whatever the contaminants of concern are. So the backlog is enormous. And the state has its own strong interest in saying, all right, EPA, you can do this. So that would be a negative for us, but that's the way the system works now. So each one of these TMDLs that is done out of the technical reports is subject to EPA's approval and can be made more stringent by EPA should they choose to. The good news for us is, since EPA, and this is one of the main reasons why the MEP made sense for the region, having bought off and accepted the methodology, EPA is predisposed to, and there's a presumption that they'll approve the TMDLs when they're based on the MEP work. So our risk of having TMDLs overwritten or disapproved by EPA when they're based on MEP is very, very low. So we have a lot of certainty in that regard. But that's the EPA role at the moment. As of now, they don't have any direct regulatory authority to impose requirements on anybody, but they do have the ability to influence what is going to have to happen based on what they include or not include in the TMDLs.
Andrew, at what point exactly do they weigh in? Is it the end of the draft CWMP, or is it the report? Or
their formal process comes at the conclusion of the state review of the technical reports and the draft TMDL that the state puts together. That said, I think there's variable amounts of input that they have along the way. You know, they're, depending on the water body and what's going on, sometimes they take a more active interest at the early stage of the process. But, you know, they have a formal regulatory review process that's laid out in the Federal Register that each one of these follows. Whether they do any advanced work on it depends.
Yeah.
Okay. They don't approve the CWMPs, however. The town by town CWMPs are subject to approval or disapproval by the commission and by the state, but not by the feds. Okay. So that's the regulatory environment as it pertains to EPA in which we're operating. From the state, just to repeat what I just said, the state has the regulations that govern the development of the comprehensive wastewater management plans. That's a state authority or a state set of state regs that lay out what the requirements are, and the approval, disapproval of the CWMPs is a state act. The other thing that the state does is, and I left it off here, I'll clean this up, but they have groundwater discharge permits. The groundwater discharge permits are for discharges in excess of 10,000 gallons a day. So if you have a really big septic system that's over 10,000 gallons a day, you need a groundwater discharge permit. If you have a treatment works, regardless of size, publicly owned or privately owned, that's over 10,000 gallons a day, you need an NPDES discharge or a groundwater discharge permit from the state. And you know, so everything we have on the Cape that's over 10,000 gallons a day, and I think there are 45, 46 of them, is my memory, require state discharge permits. And those typically have limits between 5 and 10 on nitrogen, and they have other conventional pollutants, BOD, TSS, and solids, and, total organic carbon now, and a whole range of requirements. And you're limited in where you can place those, in particular by the presence of zone 2s to drinking water wells, or the closer you are to, or your positioning in a zone 2 can limit your discharge permit requirements, make them much more significant, especially in the area of total organic carbon now, which has become somewhat of a surrogate for unregulated contaminants and the whole witch's brew of personal care products and endocrine disruptors and all sorts of things that are in the waste stream that nobody has a real sense of what to do with. So, so the state gets involved in all those discharges, and that's a consistent requirement. Title V regulatory actions, obviously, anything below 10,000 gallons a day that doesn't require an NPS discharge needs Title V approval. For the most part, that's delegated down to the towns through the boards of health. So each one of your boards are dealing with implementing Title V requirements. Towns have the authority to impose additional restrictions beyond the state minimums in Title V, much to the chagrin of the development community that wants one consistent standard and would, as much as it hates Title V, would like if Title V were the consistent code, not the minimum code. But you each have your ability to do something different, and a lot of towns have. I didn't go into that at all in this discussion of authority. But most significantly, as it pertains to us, is Title V has a provision yet unutilized to designate certain areas as nitrogen-sensitive embayments. And under Title V, the state can, through a public hearing process, propose to designate an area as nitrogen sensitive. So it would be the watershed that contributes nitrogen to an impaired estuary, as demonstrated by the technical reports in the TMDL. So those become the underpinnings. And in instances where they determine or establish nitrogen sensitive embayments, then the Title V regulations require IA nitrogen reducing systems everywhere within that watershed. So at any point where new systems, repairs, maintenance, or upgrades of existing systems would take place, the requirement would be to put in an IA system. And as we all know, those can be rather expensive. The problem with nitrogen-sensitive designation is that you increase the cost of compliance by requiring the IA systems, but you don't get the water quality benefit that one seeks from the expenditure, because most of those IA systems aren't going to get you down to the discharge levels that the technical reports indicate are necessary to achieve water quality standards. So there's been a reluctance to use this designation because it increased costs without achieving water quality benefit. You're lowering the nitrogen inputs into the system, but you may not be lowering them enough to see any return on that investment. So you increase people's cost of providing backyard on-site system treatment, but you're not seeing a return on that investment in terms of the water quality. So there's been a significant reluctance on the state's part to use this designation, although they could. That has not stopped many towns from doing something equivalent and saying in these areas you got to put IA systems in. And that's been a local decision that some towns have made. So there are, as a result, I believe about 1,500 IA systems on the Cape. And those are being monitored by George Hoyfelder's group in County Health and Environment. And so we have a fairly extensive database on the performance of those systems and what the numbers are. And we can have a discussion, I think probably will have a discussion about the performance of those systems as one of our upcoming issue areas, so I won't stray into that now. But there are, 1,500's not a ton, given that there are 126,000 systems on the Cape. So 1,500 is a relatively small slice of that pie, but it's not insignificant. And it's provided a fair amount of information on the performance. Last thing the state can do, and I included the statute in here, is the state has the authority to require or create a water pollution abatement district. That can be one town or it can be more than one town, it can be portions of more than one community, where they can go in and say, we think there's effectively a regional issue here that can't be solved by any one town acting on its own. So we are mandating the creation of a wastewater management district and give it the authority or the responsibility, a little bit of its responsibility without authority, to take on the issue. So they can go in and create now regional entities. It's a blunt tool, and it doesn't come with it. It's a page, 2.25 pages of authority. So it's very high level. And there's a lot in here that it doesn't speak to, like how you raise and appropriate the money. So you can create this authority or this district. You can give it the responsibility for solving the problem, but it has no revenue raising capability. So it's a little bit of a paper tiger in that regard. But there is authority. It has never been used. There is authority for the state to come down and say, and mandate one or more, or two or more towns work together and sort of join them at the hip and create a separate board with separate rules and authorities and capabilities. I would suggest that it would be very difficult for an entity, given the authorities that exist in the statute, to function effectively and meet its mandate. But DEP could do it, and we should all be aware of the fact that they could do it. And then lastly, at the county, county reviews CWMPs submitted by the towns, this joint MEPA review. So the county, through the commission, has the ability to say that, you know, a town's local plan should or shouldn't be approved. The regional plan that the county is developing will provide the framework in which that analysis and determination can be made, so that people will have a sense of what the county policy is on regional wastewater management, and therefore whether or not one particular community's proposal is consistent with that county view. So that they do have that authority. The county has the authority to review districts of critical planning concern. So, and that can be done on a wastewater basis. Hasn't been done. There's been chatter out there about it being done. Such a designation is subject to the approval by the county assembly. So it's not a unilateral act. I mean, there's some unilateral act that the commission can do, but ultimately the final approval and making it stick is subject to the approval of the assembly. But the primary role, I think, of the commission is to do the regional wastewater management plan, and then do the individual reviews of the community-specific plans for consistency with that regional plan. So that's kind of an overview of the framework in which we're all operating. You know, and what's not said in here is that you know, towns have the ability on their own to develop intermunicipal agreements on terms and conditions that are suitable to the towns, to band together to work on wastewater management issues on their own. Towns certainly have the right to petition the legislature for specific authorities that they would want, whether it's to create a supported intermunicipal agreement and give a town specific authority to do something that the general laws specifically don't authorize. So there's other avenues, but these are the primary existing regulatory and statutory requirements that under which they constrain how we're all living at the moment.
I don't know if that's interesting or depressing. There's so many people involved. Andrew, would it be possible to put together a brief flow diagram from, you know, start to finish on who weighs in when, just so that people don't get too lost in the
We can try.
this discussion?
We can try.
Because some way at different spots may not, but it might be interesting just so it's a visual of all the people involved.
Yeah, I mean, for certain processes, we can do that. There are authorities in here that you can kind of drop out of the sky at any point. You know, if EPA chooses to assert jurisdiction on a groundwater discharge permit, there's no place in the flow chart where that could happen. It could happen at any point.
I would avoid that for now.
I'm just
I think
saying
the
that,
standard, yeah.
yeah, you know, or the timing of a designation of a nitrogen sensitive embayment, which would change the game could happen at any time. So,
I'm
you know, we
just
can,
struggling
we
to
can do a
find the
flow.
mechanism there.
Yeah, we can do a flow chart about approvals of CWMPs, or we could do a flow chart on sort of approval of changes to Title V that sort of follow the sort of normal process, that don't anticipate these major game-changing decisions that a regulatory agent could make, because that could happen, like I said, for any reason, for any stimulus.
Right.
And it's very hard to anticipate when that might happen.
And I don't want to confuse people with that anyway. I just want to have a sense of where the process is easy to understand.
Right.
That'd be good. Yeah, give it a try.
Okay.
That's useful. Any questions for Andrew? Any more, Jerry? You should sit closer if you're going to ask questions.
I need the exercise. Still gaining weight. Jerry Patamas, Town of Falmouth. Regardless who the permit issuing authority is, it could be EPA, or right now in Massachusetts, it's the state. Once the CWMP is approved with an allocation of, let's say, direct and non-point source controls, or what we would expect for nitrogen removal from INA systems, it is my understanding under at least the federal and if not the state law, that could now become binding permit requirements for the Title V or the groundwater discharges, such that the CWMP was approved on INA systems achieving 5 milligrams per liter. That the only regulatory mechanisms that exist to implement the CWMP, as I understand it now, is through the permit issuing authority, and that would be Massachusetts, regardless right now. I think I stated that correctly, and maybe it's something you don't want to get into now.
I'm trying to think how to respond to it. The CWMP and the TMDL, in order to ultimately get approved, you have to have a reasonable assurance that you can achieve the controls that are anticipated. So, for example, the reason that Vermont had theirs taken away was they said, okay, we got a load of, 100, whatever, units of phosphorus. We got POTWs, we're going to get them down. We're going to take care of 50 through them. And then we're going to get the other 50 through non-point source controls on agricultural runoff. And the crux of the case was there was no reasonable assurance because the state had no regulatory mechanism and therefore no particular ability to assure the agencies and the courts that they could get that 50 out of non-point. So the whole thing was thrown out. So if, taking it down to our situation, if we had a CWMP and given in town X that said we're gonna, our plan is we're gonna rely on IA systems to get us down to this number, and here's our response plan, and that got approved, you need to have a reasonable assurance. What's your strategy? Okay, it's not regulatory, so we're gonna do it this way. We're gonna buy IA, you could say we're gonna buy and maintain IA systems for every residence on Cape Cod or that falls within the watershed, and we're going to assume control of it. So we have a reasonable assurance, because we have a plan and the money to do this, that we're going to achieve our target. Okay? If you just say, we're going to get there because we're going to have IA systems because that's what we want to have happen, and it's an aspirational goal rather than an actual plan, somebody could come in and challenge that approval and say, they have no ability to get there. So they're just saying, we need to reduce by X amount, and the town is saying, we're going to get there by, hoping that people do it, then that's not an approved plan. If you're the town, you're still on the hook, if you will, if your other control strategies fail. So it could say, if you had a POTW, let's say they permitted it at a certain amount, assuming that the rest of the plan was going to happen, that was your control strategy. So if you were to say, rather than go down to the limits of technology on our discharge, we want to be a somewhat more conventional treatment limit. And we think it's cheaper for us to get that additional increment by doing something else, whatever that something else is. And you do that something else and it doesn't get you the reductions, or you don't do that something else, then they can go back through the permit and squeeze you on the permit to get that reduction that you said you were going to get somewhere else. So once you say this is my plan, you're on the hook for that plan.
Under Massachusetts, the regulatory strategy could be, if we're saying, a community says, we're going to achieve, and we'll just stick with something that gets permitted either through Title V or the groundwater, that we're going to achieve X pounds of nitrogen removal by controlling our septic tank systems down to this level. It is my understanding that at that point in time, that's that's in the CWMP.
You're on the hook for that.
In the ground, if the state issued a groundwater permit for greater than 10,000 gallons, it would have to assure you met that. And it could be interpreted that the boards of public health that issue Title V may also be required to issue a far more stringent Title V permit, because the idea was that to achieve surface water quality standards, you have to ensure that all your INA systems that you permit, on the schedule you permit, meet the load that was allocated to be reduced by Title V. So there is a regulatory mechanism, and it's going to have to be implemented through Title V or the groundwater permit.
I think the theoretical scenario you paint is correct. The actual, I can't think of a actual case where that has begun to play itself out, and the implications of that in terms of, all right, well, Board of Health, you need to do A, B, and C because your CWMP says you're going to rely on that. That hasn't happened yet, but the scenario you paint is a fair sort of connect the dots. Where does this all lead? You know, it's consistent with what you just described. Hasn't happened anywhere yet, though.
I'm not actually sure how you, where you go with that, though, because you're looking at overall nitrogen removal, and so you may take out more in one system and less in the other, and you're suggesting that you have to have the same standard for everything rather than the cumulative.
I think in the
Is that what you're saying?
I think in the practical terms it doesn't work.
Okay.
Because no, I mean I think you're right, and that's sort of the danger of this whole, exposure to federal permitting, because the realities of performance don't match the standards that are out there. So it's very hard to, if you say, all right, we're going to rely on on-site systems, anything that's approved right now doesn't get you down to the numbers that
Right,
the
so you're
TMDLs
looking
would
at the
indicate.
total.
So you set people up to fail in a sense, and so I think it's, from my perspective, it's bad regulatory policy when there's no ability to comply with the underlying requirement. So you sort of give someone, whether it's a town or an individual, the standard that the technology doesn't allow them to meet. The code doesn't allow you to use a tight tank, even though that's a lousy outcome, but that would cut off your discharge. But the state code doesn't allow tight tanks as a permanent solution. So for anyone who's in that situation, they're kind of stuck. They've got a mandate that they have no ability as an individual to act to comply with, and yet there's no off-ramp for them. So I think that's that's the scenario of federal regulation that we've always, and why the county has consistently articulated and laid out in its opposition response to the notice to sue, why we have always consistently opposed federal permitting on the Cape, because there's no rational way to apply it in a way that works and doesn't waste a lot of money.
Yeah. Any other questions for Andrew? This obviously is an important discussion, because I think we still have people around that think we're just making this stuff up. And, it's driven by more regulations than I'd like to think about. But I'd like to, we need to be sure that that's clear. And any ways we can present this, make it more understandable and get the word out, I think is.
Yeah. I think
It's
what
critical.
we might do is, for the next steering committee, have George come in and talk about the actual performance of these alternative systems.
Yeah.
And then probably for the public discussion, combine this issue with that issue.
Yeah.
Because I think this is, in and of itself, it's important, but it's not enough to hold a series of public meetings around. I think if we marry it up with the performance of the IH systems. So
And
my
I know-
guess is that steering committee is in a couple of weeks, and then we'll do the public meetings on this subject matter and the performance issue, a week or 10 days after that. So early to mid-June.
Yeah, that'd be good, because I know the last report I saw from George was now several years old.
Right.
I know he's updated him. I haven't
Yeah, we haven't had that,
He probably
we haven't had
has,
that
but I
discussion in a
haven't-
while, and I think, you know, the playing field on alternatives has changed a little bit, and it's worth having his informed update of what the performance that we can expect from those systems
On
is.
a, okay, on a related issue, in terms of issues, one of the issues I presented a while back was, I had several technical issues I thought would be interesting to explore. My suggestion or my question is it worthwhile to reassemble the technical advisory committee to look at a couple of those issues as we move
Yeah, I mean, I think
forward?
we'd always anticipated doing that. I think, you know, I thought sort of these initial table setter issues were important to get up there, and then,
And I agree with this, what you've done fully.
Yeah.
I'm just
yeah.
suggesting it's time now to, or at least plan to get the technical advisory committee back together and start looking at a couple of these other issues.
Yep, we gotta
And
finish
I
up the
think our
schedule.
chore is to have some more discussions of what those technical issues are we want the technical advisory committee to look at.
Right,
Okay?
all righty.
Mark?
Just a point of information on that, if we establish an active technical advisory committee, having served on a whole bunch of different
Right.
committees and subcommittees, that being one of them, we should clearly lay out with our board, our general board, and with the technical advisory committee, how their input will be taken. I mean, certainly we discuss it when it comes before us, but I think what we found many times was there was a tremendous amount of discussion, kind of at the practitioner and technical level, and when it came up to our level, it wasn't necessarily digested and utilized the way that maybe, the practical side of it would have been understood. So
Yeah.
we should establish those up front so that the technical advisory committee is an active part of it, and it just doesn't produce a report that doesn't really get utilized.
Well, I think, my understanding of what Larry's asked me to do in the past is that we should be using that committee to help frame these issue-specific discussions for the steering committee, and then they would be going out for public comment. So I think
Yeah.
you can sort of constrain it. It's not action items, but it's framing and making sure that the issues that have a technical component to them are discussed and presented in a way that it's illuminative to the public as they think about these issues in the context of whether a regional approach makes sense or not.
Mark, I'm aware of the sensitivities of this as well. And that's why I suggest we want to bring it up as a group and discuss the specific questions we want and then frame it. Yeah, but you're exactly right. Thank you for that.
Kara, do you know when our next steering, I don't have it on my calendar for some reason.
It's Thursday, July 5th,
Okay.
and it will be here at 9:30.
Steering?
Steering.
July, June?
June, I'm sorry, I'm skipping ahead. So, take back the 5th. It's always the first Thursday of the month. I'm not
Okay.
sure yet then what that date would be.
All right, so that's the 7th. You're back, or not back?
I'm not here then.
All right, we may bump that a week then.
To the
I'm gone from the
14th?
5th to the 12th.
Yeah.
So shall we change it to the 14th?
Let's just change that to the 14th now.
Okay.
So it'll be the morning of the 14th.
Are we sticking with 9:30 or 11:15? What's our time?
9:30.
9:30, I think
That was
was
a
something
one-time.
special
That
was going on.
That was
there.
because of me,
Oh, that's fine.
and then I didn't show.
Any other discussion points? We will, this wasn't an official meeting unfortunately, but we'll at least get the information out and go from there. Last chance for all you guys sitting there in the gallery. Thanks, yeah, we'll wave at each other. I think we may explore next time putting this back together as a table or something. What do you think? Does this arrangement work?
Yeah, this is fine. Yep.
Okay.
If you'd like, we can set up tables. for
Well,
the
it's
next
fine for
meeting and
everyone.
have we've done it both ways, so whichever you prefer. I can help coordinate that.
I'll go as a full too. I'm just trying to, I like meetings a little more intimate when we have a small group than this allows, but whichever, if they're all fine with this, I'm fine with it. Okay? We'll close the meeting then. And there's 2 items we didn't get to this time, but we'll have to put it on next time when we have an agenda, quorum.
Reorganization of quorum, right. Okay.
Move adjournment?
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Andrew, when,